Okay, so this is a, a slide deck, uh, nearly 40 slides. So I'll try to get them all done today, but given that we're having a bit of a discussion, it may have to kind of tide over for the next session that I'm doing. So I don't think Karen's going to cover this particular aspect. Um, so what I've tried to do here is I've tried to give examples to illustrate the principles of service dominant logic. So don't get put off by the name. The, the concept of service dominant logic comes from two authors, particular Vargo and Lusch. They're both professors in the US, and they, if you like, designed or developed this theory quite some years ago. It's been published in a lot of places. I've actually put references at the very end of the slide deck, which you'll find, by the way, on Blackboard in the week that we're in. Or I might have put it in last week and then it tides over, but you'll find it in one of the week folders anyway. This particular presentation, and SDL stands for Service Dominant Logic, and the clue is in the name. So basically, as some of my slides will illustrate, Vargo and Lusch, those are the two authors, their surnames, came up with this theory, and the theory comprises of a number of kind of principles, if you like, that make up the theory. And what I want to try and highlight for you as best I can is how the theory translates into actual practice, right? Because we don't just want a theory for the sake of a theory. You want to know, what does this mean for understanding services marketing? How can I apply this? Does this help me to think differently about a problem? Could I use this, for example, to, create or develop ideas for a new service? And I think all of those apply, actually. But you'll have to kind of bear with me. And if you get to the end of today's lecture and you feel a bit, oh, that's a bit theoretical, it's a bit heavy going, that's fine. That's totally understandable, right? Don't expect that you will totally get everything these guys have written in less than 2 hours. That's just not feasible. But we'll do our best to kind of break the ice and get a good understanding of it. There is, as I say, lots of journal articles written by different people, but the references I've given are the 4 or 5 key papers written by the authors themselves, Vargo and Lusch. I think it's Bob Lusch and Stephen Vargo, I think, to give them full names. And so you can start by reading those articles. And I may have mentioned this before, I may not have. I'm quite a fan or quite an advocate of Google's Notebook LM. Anybody use, it's one of the AI large language models. Has anybody used Google Notebook LM? No. Well, I'll show it to you actually. Do I have it open? In fact, I have it open in my browser. Why don't I just do that quickly? There's a reason I'm doing this, by the way. So, okay, this was another module at undergraduate level, but I want to get the SDL one. Oh yeah, there we go. Right. So this is what Google Notebook LM looks like. Okay. Now, as far as I know, I might be wrong, it's free to students at the moment. I think Google is giving it free because I got the pro version free as an academic working in the university, and I think as students you get the same thing. But just have a look, and if just be careful you don't pay more money. It should be free, and you can see I've got the pro version up here on the right. Now, what is it? Well, it's like a lot of you've probably used ChatGPT or used Claude, you've used Gemini, and all that. And I know you probably get mixed messages as students about AI. Some academics might go, you shouldn't touch AI because that's kind of like academic offense, that's plagiarism, you're using AI to write your assignment, what the hell are you doing, right? But the way I'm not advocating that you use Notebook LM to write any assignments. It wouldn't work for this module anyway, would it? Because it's an exam, so that wouldn't really be an advantage. But what you can do is you can use Notebook LM as your assistant, right? As your kind of high-tech assistant. And I do that increasingly, actually. And what I've done here, for example, with this particular notebook, because what happens with Google Notebook LM, which I really like, you can set up multiple notebooks, right? So I've got different projects running in my, as well as teaching, I do other things. Like, for example, here, my book that I'm writing with Gary. So Gary Minkoff is an assistant professor of practice at Rutgers University in New Jersey in the US. And I was at a conference there about 2 years ago, I think, and I met him. We had a cup of coffee, and we decided after chat, that we would write a book together on entrepreneurial marketing. Because Gary's really, really well connected in business in the US. He's more of a practitioner and a business guy than he is an academic, although he works at Rutgers Business School. So kind of like we're bringing our respective skill sets together. But what I've done there is because we're doing it on entrepreneurial marketing, I have so far uploaded 55 sources to the notebook to support my project with Gary. Because one of the things that I'm doing, he isn't, but I'm doing it, is I want to get a nice summary and themes of all of the theories that support entrepreneurial marketing. There's been lots published in different areas. So what I've done is I've curated, which means brought together, so far 55, but I'll be adding a lot more to that. If you have the pro version, you can include, I think, up to 300 sources. So it sounds like a lot, but I've already got 50. I could probably get 6 times that sources related to entrepreneurial marketing. Now, that's too much for me to read. I'm familiar with quite a lot of it, but I cannot read 300 articles, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm putting in prompts to start, looking at the themes, right? And I could do that for all my sources, or I might say, actually, I'm going to deselect all of them and I'm going to focus on this author, Steve Blank. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, roughly 8, 9 sources, right? What does he have to say about entrepreneurial marketing? These are articles, these are textbook chapters, and I can get some nice summaries. And I never stop just after the first prompt. I always work on the prompts, develop better prompts, get into more detail. And I go and look at the papers as well, right? So it's really easy to set up a notebook. So for example, if we look at this one, there is already a couple of the papers by Vargo and Lush. You can see them here. In fact, if I just move this, pull this right across like this, here, right? You can see already the proper title of the article in the proper citation format. So it's another little tip. If you are going to do this and you want to start pulling together articles related to services marketing or chapters of textbooks, or actually also YouTube links or website links, which it also works with, which is interesting and useful, I would recommend that when you create the resource, when you upload the resource, i.e. the PDF, you can go in and you can rename the source. What I do is I go to Google Scholar, I type in the name of the article, it gives me the proper citation, how to actually write that in an assignment, and I copy and paste that into the name of the file for Google Notebook LM. Because that means from here on in, if I want to cite or put any of these references in the book, it's already in the format that I need it to be in. So just a small little tip. But I mean, I don't want this to turn into a presentation about Google Notebook LM, but there are lots of things then in the studio you can do for your output. You can mind map, you can create reports, all sorts of things. It's pretty good. So I won't say anything more about it at this stage, because as I say, I want to get on to my lecture. But when you look at the last slide, which is further reading, you can see I've put in 5 key papers by Vargo and Lush. So what you guys could do is you could go and grab those PDFs, take you half an hour to do that. You could set up Google Notebook for services marketing, and you could create 5 sources. and you could actually name the sources exactly how I've done it on the slide. Then you could start to following this lecture. You might have a few things that you remember that I said, and you say, okay, well, Philip said that in the lecture. I want to now, I want to link that to what Vargo and Lush wrote about in these, scientific journals. So you might give it a prompt saying, okay, according to service dominant logic, um, you know, the benefit of a service can only, I'll explain this later, can only be realized by the beneficiary of the service, right? Already sounds complicated. So you could give a prompt like that, and you could say, what do the authors of these 5 articles have to say about that? And then what you'll get then is you'll get a nice connection between the lecture and what the literature says about that topic, right? And that's where I think AI can be really helpful, because you're not just being lazy and just asking AI to do all the work. You've been at the lecture, right? You've listened, you've taken notes, and on the basis of that, you've made a prompt. That's the difference. And I feel that with AI, like things like this, you get so much more out of it when you know about the topic already, rather than just coming at it like you know nothing. Because then you write lazy prompts, and what happens is AI hallucinates and comes back with a load of nonsense. And that's where it gets, that's where it's not good. So anyway, I'll leave that with you. Why don't you have a go with that, and then you can let me know how you've got on. I'd be interested in your experience of that. I'd be interested in how that kind of enriches your learning and your experience of being here, because there's all of this literature that's been published in these journals, and a lot of students are just not engaging with that literature. Because when you open up one of these articles, like maybe 30 pages in the Journal of Marketing, it's written in very quite dense, I think unnecessarily complex language. And it's a barrier, particularly if English isn't your first language. But to be honest with you, even when I talk to UK students, particularly undergraduate students, even final year, they're also not really engaging, and they don't have an excuse, because English is their first language. So even if you're really fluent in English, it's still a bit of a barrier, I think. And that's where I feel those kind of AI tools can help you get over the barrier. But you can use it as your kind of assistant while you're at uni. All right, so I hope that all made sense. So let's go, I'll pop this on presenter view then. I'll sort of give about maybe 20 minutes or so, and then maybe hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion based on what you've worked on. All right, so I've given a little bit of an introduction already in terms of the authors, the articles, and these are some of the things that I'm hoping you'll take away either at the end of today or when I finish off in the next session as well, because I don't want to rush through it too quickly. So again, apologies for the slightly lengthy slide in terms of text, but I thought it was worth giving the full quotes because it kind of helps to set the theory. And then what we'll do as we go through it, I'll try to give you some practical examples. Okay, so let's have a look. Now this source, which by the way, I've also put on Blackboard, I think is really interesting. It's called H2H marketing, and the H stands for human. So it's basically human to human marketing, right? And it's written by several authors. One of them is Philip Kotler. You'll probably recognize the name. He's like one of the kind of, big sort of influencers in the marketing world, been around for many years, a professor in the US. And he's one of the co-authors of this book. But it's called Human to Human Marketing. And I've taken the quotes from there because in their study of what they call human to human marketing, service dominant logic is a big part of that book. And actually both books, there's a book and there's case studies, they're both up on Blackboard as PDFs, the whole thing, the whole book. So you could actually, in addition to the SDL articles, you could also add those two to Google Notebook LM as additional sources, right? To help you analyze the book. So according to Vargo and Lush, different papers, they advocate, recommend a reconsideration of the way that goods and services are viewed, okay, and argue that the distinction is obsolete. It doesn't apply once we realize that goods are just a way of offering another form of service. So they argue essentially that a tangible good, be it my laptop, maybe my bicycle helmet, my bike, if it was here, not locked up outside, they render a service. Okay. So if I take my mountain bike, which is hopefully safely locked up outside, um, I buy it, it's a physical good. It's a tangible good. I buy it from a bike store, I take it home, I put it in the garage, safe. But not until I start taking that bike out and riding it along different routes or using it to commute to work or whatever it is, then I begin to enjoy the service that that good provides to me. Okay, so it takes a little while for you to get your head wrapped around this, and I do have more examples to share with you. But essentially, that's the kind of crux of it, that even a physical good actually becomes a service when it's used by the purchaser or the buyer of that good. Okay, so more examples to come. Hopefully, it'll make more sense then. So, in other words, just to kind of more or less what I've been saying, customers do not buy goods or services. What they do is they buy an offer which renders a service which creates value. All right. So we have to think about that. In other words, we always have to think about the value in use of a service. How does our customer use the service that we're providing? That's what we call value in use. And that will be different for different customers. Okay? So you could have a hotel, right? And you might have like 100 people staying in that hotel. They might be a mix of business travelers, leisure travelers, young, old, families, couples, whatever it is, right? They will all be, for them, the hotel service will always be unique. It'll always be unique to them. It's not going to be standard across those 100 people. Even within a group of friends together who are there at the hotel, it could be different. So we really always have to understand how our user, how our customer actually, what sort of service, what kind of value do they get from that service or that product. Okay, we have to understand that. That's absolutely key. So as far as Vargo and Lush are concerned, this division between goods and services is really not that appropriate anymore. So what we need to do is we need to think about from the customer perspective, as it says here, right? That activities render services or things render services. So it's not just what we might consider, oh, okay, well, services is intangible. Therefore, it's all about banks. It's about airlines. It's hotels. It's going to the dentist. It's going to the doctor. All of those are pure services. They're intangible. But what about physical goods, right? What about that company I showed you that sells hovercraft? Do you remember I showed you that example? Well, that's not an intangible service. A hovercraft is a big physical, tangible thing that's made in a factory. But Vargo and Lush would argue that hovercraft renders a service to the company that buys the hovercraft. So if you have a shipyard in India or a shipyard in Japan or in China or any other part of the world, and they buy a hovercraft from this company in Southampton, they are expecting certain types of value from buying that hovercraft. For some of them, it may all be about the speed of the hovercraft. For others, it may be about the reliability of the hovercraft, and so on and so forth, right? So different users will have different value priorities when they purchase that. And as in marketing, we need to understand very, very carefully what is the value that our customers get when they use our service or use our product. And we shouldn't just think that services are purely intangible things. So, what I'm saying to you is we need to rethink this. We need to rethink the fact that all things render a service, okay? Whether it's a physical thing or not, okay? So, like, for example, I'm going to give you more examples, right? And then I'll get on to the rest of my slides. On what day is today? Wednesday. Yesterday, I had a golf lesson, right? Not my first. And I really needed my golf lesson, right? So I had bought my golf clubs. So my son started to play golf again. I thought, I'm going to start playing again so we can spend some time together and play golf and what have you, et cetera, et cetera. So I bought a set of golf clubs, and I won't bore you with all the details. And that's fine. But having the golf clubs is like a tangible product, right? That's a good, okay. But what service what value do I get from those golf clubs, and what value do I get from the instructor who's giving me the golf lessons? And that's the service that's rendered by the golf clubs. The golf clubs are just a set of clubs in a bag. But what is it that they enable you to do, right? They enable you, like, for example, they enable you to get out on the golf course, which kind of helps your, let's say, your exercise, your well-being. You get to spend time with your friends because there's a few guys I play with, and so that's a social thing. There's also that competitive element, right? I'm reasonably competitive when it comes to sports, so I want to get better. I don't just want to go around the golf course hitting the ball. I want to get better at it, right? And that's why I had the lesson. And again, when I was having the lesson with the instructor, it was a co-creation. Scenario. It was about co-creation. He was teaching me, and then I was responding and saying okay and what have you. So it's that kind of idea that whether it's the physical, tangible golf clubs or whether it's just a lesson, they're all rendering a service, okay, that has value for me as the buyer. So I hope that makes sense. So we're having a shift in focus, right? We're not thinking so much about what the producer's doing. We're thinking about it from the customer's point of view. How do they utilize that service? Okay. So if we go on, I mean, this is the key one that's often given, right? So it's kind of like a classic saying by this management consultant or management expert, which really fits SD logic. So the saying goes that people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole, right? Think about that. And a 1/4 inch, you guys all probably talk about millimeters and centimeters, not feet and inches, right? That's more a UK or American way of thinking about it, but I don't even know what a 1/4 inch is, like a couple of centimeters, right? It doesn't matter. You know what a drill is, right? You drill into the wall, right? Because you want to hang a picture on the walls, you got to drill into the wall, right? So what are you doing? Are you buying a 1/4-inch drill or are you buying a 1/4-inch hole? The point being that the drill is the service I'm getting from the drill is the hole on which I'm going to hang this lovely picture that somebody bought for me in my house. So I'm buying the hole, I'm not buying the drill. I'm buying the end solution, okay? What is the end solution? That's a simple example, but that would apply to something really complex like buying a hovercraft or other examples maybe you've looked at when you were preparing for today. So for goods dominant logic, we're selling a thing, which is the drill. But with service dominant logic, we're buying the capability to make the whole. That's the difference. Okay, and then how does that connect to a practical example? Well, if you take this company, I've heard of them, I don't know them that well, Hilti, they basically make power tools like drills, hammers, all the things you want to do for construction, and that's why they stopped just selling power tools and doing something called fleet management, tool fleet management, right? Where construction firms pay for guaranteed tool availability rather than owning the tools. So if you are a, let's say, construction company, do you want to buy all of the hardware? Because actually, if you buy this really expensive power tool, you might only use it 1 week out of 52 weeks. So would it make more sense to rent those tools as and when you need them? Okay. And that sort of changes the game. That changes the game from being, for this company, they've almost done a pivot from being purely a company that sells tangible goods to a company that provides a service at a price. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, because sometimes we don't want to invest in actually owning the thing, and there's there's many examples of companies and organizations that work on that basis. In fact, there's a well-known retail company called Machine Mart. There's one just around the corner from where I live. They're in all the UK towns, and they essentially do that. They rent very expensive tools. Like if you are into DIY, right? DIY is do it yourself, right? So instead of getting somebody in, you want to do it yourself, right? You can rent all sorts of tools from these guys. So I think this isn't just a theoretical, um, theoretical concept. It's also something that translates into, in this case, a new business model for this company. And many organizations are now doing this. So I talked already about value in use, right? The value that we derive from the service when we use the service. You think about actually your own experience here at Southampton. I don't know, let's say there's 20 people in the room. If I asked all of you privately, anonymously, to write down your experience of being in Southampton, being a student here, and all the things you've taken advantage of, not just maybe coming to the lectures, but joining societies, doing internships, all sorts of stuff, right? That you can do at the uni, sports clubs, what have you. You would all have very different experiences. Your value and use of your time here as a student would be unique across all 20 of you. And that's why we talk about services as being very personalized and very unique to the individual. So, for example, if a consumer buys an expensive high-end mountain bike but leaves it in their garage without riding it, there's been no value created. Okay? The only value is to the company that sold the bike to you, right? But if for example, that company wanted to build a relationship, we talked about CRM, didn't we? If that bike seller wants to build a longer term relationship with you, I would argue it's not enough just to sell you the bike as a one-off. You want to have other sales linked to the bike. Like I, for example, want you to come back with your bike to get it serviced. Because after you've ridden the bike for a couple of months, you need to get it serviced, right? The oil, the chain, whatever, okay? It needs to be serviced to be safe and reliable and all the rest of it. You're not going to do that if you're not riding it. If I come back into the shop, I might see another bike that I'd like, or I want to upgrade to a better bike, whatever it is, okay? So it's important that we create this kind of relationship. So we need to distinguish between value in exchange, which is what the customer pays the bike shop for the bike, to value in use, which is really the service that the buyer gets from owning the bike. Okay, and it's important to create that sort of relationship. Okay, so in other words, from a service dominant logic point of view, no value is created unless the service, whatever it is, is realized, and all the various things, all the various kind of benefits and value you get from owning the bike. So if you were, that's another kind of idea here, right? So if you were making light bulbs like Philips or General Electric, how does your business model change if you stop selling light bulbs and start selling illumination as a service? Because what does a light bulb do? It illuminates a room, right? It brightens a room. So let's explore that. So if you sell light bulbs, you probably want them to break eventually, to have a shelf life, and it's what's called planned obsolescence. It's the same thing with iPhones, right? What happens to your iPhone? This is like only an iPhone 12, but you guys have probably all got the iPhone 17 Pro because you're all, so rich, right? And you want to have the latest, best, greatest phone, whether it's iPhone or whatever. Anyway, what do Apple do? Basically, your phone becomes obsolete. Your phone can't run the apps anymore. Your phone can't connect properly to 5G anymore, whatever it is, and you have to buy a new handset, a new smartphone, new hardware to be able to run the software. So that's obviously where Apple make huge amounts of money, because you're just trading in and you're upgrading your iPhone all the time. And that's what we call about planned obsolescence. When something is obsolete, it no longer works. That's what planned obsolescence means, right? If you sell light, you want the bulbs to last forever to reduce your maintenance costs, right? So it's the difference. So again, that could be a service opportunity. If you're a company that sells lighting, maybe you provide that as a service where people can come back in and they can replace their light bulbs, or you have a different kind of business model rather than just selling the light bulb. So you think about it like this. Think about it particularly in business to business, where you're selling something, a physical thing. Is there an opportunity to replace that by selling a service? Okay, as we saw with the power tools, for example, earlier on. So really what I'm trying to get you to think about here is the difference between selling a thing, right, and selling something that renders a service. And Vargo and Lush, Service Dom Logic, talk a lot about customer co-creation. They always say that the customer is a co-creator of value. Do you remember I used this I said in the lecture, this is a co-creation situation. What did I say? How do you co-create the lecture with me? What was the thing? What was the example we used? Which we're going to do soon, actually, when you tell me about your ideas. But how do you co-create with me here?
Answering questions, words.
Yeah, answering questions, but also maybe asking questions and maybe doing a little bit of work like on Spotify before you come to the lecture. Yeah, exactly. Kind of interactive, participating, co-creating. That's exactly what's happening. And it happened in my golf. It happened in my golf lesson yesterday. Like the guy's called Jack. If he just said to me, "Right, Philip, I want you to, do this for your swing," right? And I don't give him any feedback, and I don't say things like, "Oh yeah, I got it. Oh yeah, that really works. Thanks, I'll work on that." If I'm not giving, because that's the kind of guy I am, I'm quite so communicative. If I'm just one of these people who's like this, he's just think, "Geez, that's hard work." Do you know what I mean? That he's not really a nice guy to teach how to play golf. So he needs to get feedback from me that what he's telling me makes sense to me. That's how it works. And the more that we co-create, the more I'm going to recommend him to friends of mine who also need golf lessons. And that's the kind of business that he's in. Right. So now, the other thing that Vargo and Lush talk about here, which I'm going to perhaps introduce you to today, but maybe not quite in full detail. But they talk about two different types of resources. I'm just looking for a pen here. Oh, hold on in there, right? So I'll write it over here. So they talk about operant resources, OPERANT, but they also talk about operand resources. It looks like the same word, but one ends at a T and one ends at a D, right? No, there's more. There's more of a difference in that. So what are operant resources? So operant resources are um, let me give you this example again, actually. I think this would be a really good one to illustrate this. So I talked in one of my previous lectures about these guys. This is our hovercraft company again, do you remember? Right. I think this is a good way to illustrate it, actually. So in that company, there are two types of resources. There's operant with a T and operand with a D. The operant with a T resources are, an example of that would be the engineers who work for this company. They're the men and women who've got, probably did engineering at uni. They are highly skilled engineers in marine engineering. Okay, they're the guys who can build the hovercraft by applying their knowledge, their skills, their experience, and their expertise. All of those words, knowledge, skills, experience, expertise, they're all operant resources. Resources. They're all resources. You can say they're almost a little bit intangible as a resource, because like knowledge is kind of an intangible thing, isn't it? Your skills, your expertise, your experience. But the operand with a D in the case here would be the physical resources the company has. That would be the factory that they have at their headquarters, which is in Southampton, near the docks, near the water. It would be the drills. It would be all the special machinery you need to build one of these things. Okay? So you need the physical machinery, but you also need the human skills and expertise. So the operant resources are the skills and knowledge. The operand are those physical, those physical kind of more tangible resources that you've got. Let me give another example. What about a restaurant and a kitchen? Right. I used to work in hotels before I went into academia, and you know, basically you've got a kitchen, right? This was quite a big hotel I was working in. There was like an executive chef, the main chef, right? And I think it was a man at the time, and he was kind of like ruled. He ruled the kitchen, right? Nobody disagreed with him, and he was the boss in the kitchen. But the kitchen now would be a whole, like there might be 30, 40 chefs all answering to him and all like in a different hierarchy. And then you'd have all the equipment, the gas cookers, the deep fryers, you name it, right? Like some very high tech kitchen equipment. That's the operand resources. So what you need the operand resources that are applied to the operand resources to create a solution. Okay, so that factory, that equipment that makes the hovercraft are useless unless you apply the resources, the operant resources to them. So that's what Vargo and Lush mean by this interplay between operand and operant. Now, if you want to follow up on this, as I was saying earlier, with my Google Notebook LM example, here's a suggestion. After the lecture at some point, once you've set up Notebook, you've uploaded the Vargo and Lush papers, you could say, I would like to know more about the relationship between operand and operant resources. Please tell me what these sources have to say about that, what these articles have to say about that. And you'll get a nice starter. and that will give you something quick, and then you can kind of start to build on that, use that to follow up in lectures with questions, all the rest of it. And yeah, and then you're kind of in a much better, more knowledgeable position, really. Okay. So actually in that situation, I would almost say like Google Notebook LM is like the operand, like it's not physical, but it's the kind of resource. And your prompt is the operand. Because to build a good prompt for AI, you need to have knowledge and skills and expertise. And that's actually going to be a massive, almost a massive career opportunity in itself, is being good at writing prompts for AI. Okay, I don't know how much you're kind of looking into the AI world, but this. Do you know what I mean by prompt engineering? So prompt engineering is where you construct prompts to get useful results from the large language models. So keep that in your mind, guys. Um, yeah. So what about you know? It also redefines how we think about the competition. So if we view a lawnmower, do you know what I mean by a lawnmower? Right, something that cuts your lawn, your grass in your garden, right? Okay, and so if we view a lawnmower as a grass cutting service delivery vehicle, who is the lawnmower manufacturer's real competition? Is it other lawnmower companies, or could it be genetically modified, slow growing grass? Okay, because if people buy a different type of grass that doesn't grow very quickly, they don't need the lawnmower as much. Yep. Or if people buy artificial grass, right, like what's called astroturf, right? I know some people that do that. They don't actually have grass. It doesn't even need to be cut. It's artificial. I don't particularly like that, but anyway. So what you need to think about is what business are you in, and that will help you also to identify threats and opportunities in the environment. Okay, you need to think about what is the kind of end service. So, in other words, once you focus on the service, which is having short grass, the competitive landscape goes beyond other companies selling lawnmowers. It might be other companies selling a certain type of grass that grows really, really slowly. And then people don't need your lawnmower as much anymore. Okay, so yeah. So just a kind of summary there, to kind of summarize some of that. When we think about goods dominant logic, we think about units of output. We think about how many bikes do we sell, how many hovercraft do we sell, how many lawnmowers do we sell. But when we think about service dominant logic, we think about outcomes, value based outcomes, having shorter grass, having the quarter inch hole, having the mountain bike that I can spend a day cycling in the mountains, getting fit and spending time with my friends. That's the job that I want to get done, right? That's the social and emotional job that I want to get done. So we've got to shift our thinking from it's just a tangible thing we're selling to something that's going to render value and use and benefits, okay? The customer is a target for goods dominant logic. I just want to sell as many of these bikes to you as possible. Or if I was Jack doing the golf lessons, I'd say I just want to sell as many 1 hour lessons as I can in a week. Because I know if I'm charging £40 a lesson and I sell like whatever, 200 lessons, I'm getting 800 quid, whatever it is. But with SDL, service dominant logic, it's a bit more like CRM, customer relationship marketing. We want to think about our customer more like a partner, as a co-creator, who we work with to even enhance the value from the service, right? So you guys, rather than just being my students, you're my partners, if you want to take that to the extreme. Yeah. Uh, you know, we could almost be partners in knowledge creation, because you've done some research for today, got some ideas. I've no idea what they are. Only you know what they are. Okay. And you think there's some value in what you've been preparing, and then we'll discuss that. And as we discuss it, the value will emerge. Okay. So that's exactly how it works. So it's about a partnership rather than a just being a target. Value is added in the factory, right? So if you were the hovercraft company and you make the hovercraft, right, and it looks amazing and very high tech and very impressive, that's great. But that's your perception of the value as the manufacturer of the hovercraft. It's not how your customer perceives the value or gets the value during use. Okay, so once their client takes the hovercraft away, they'll obviously tell the company, yeah, this is amazing. This is what we're doing with it. We're doing this and we're doing that. And that's knowledge to the company selling the hovercraft, because that means they can start to think about how can we better improve our marketing to our users. Well, if we understand their value and use, that's a great start. And then, so the goal is to maximize sales. The goal here is to maximize strategic alignment. Really, what that means is it's not just about as many sales you can get, it's about a better understanding of our customers and how they derive value from the service, which will enable us to think about our entire strategy. That's everything from our value proposition to our brand image to the kind of people we recruit in the company, the whole thing, the whole kind of strategic view of the company. Because if you're going to be a customer centered company, then your whole company has to go around the customer. Your customer is at the center of everything. That's when we think about the service blueprint, right? On the front stage, the performance is all about enhancing the value that the customer gets, and the backstage is everything that goes around that to make that happen. Okay, as we're nearly at 5:02, what I suggest, we give my voice a break as well. We'll take a 10-minute comfort break as we normally do. We'll start again at 5 past, and then I'll just ask maybe a couple of people, maybe three at the most, just to share thoughts, anything, questions, ideas, you name it. Okay, so we'll take 10 minutes for our break.
Okay. If you need electricity, if you need something, I can use mine. But that's it. If it is available, should I do? Oh, so it's never okay. Oh, yeah. Oh. No, not. But if you did, then it's fine. Then I can. That's sweet. And I think that is because I can bring more things. But you can't put it. Because it can be less crispy after you power. That's why I do more. That's why I think that one. Really like cream mix. I can make some I think the good and then I'm afraid about the meat. Good. I'm thinking something we can for anything that you buy, anything that you like it, I can make it for myself. I'm not good. It's everything's yeah, me too. I'm not really sure myself. I'm not really sure. Okay, I will think about it. I prepare at home and then cook at home. So we can. But in case that we don't have enough the stuff, so we can be picked up. I can make the rice with tofu. And I know. Yeah, that's what I did. You can bring any. And beef is something. I haven't heard. Yes, because some people find they don't know which way. Oh, let me do some. Yeah, I do it. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I will do for my version. So if you want the vegetable, I do it by the way. So it's it for eating the fries. And it is even nice. I mix the recommendation. I have all the situation and salt. So I have the very yeah, yes, yes, I can make it. It's too spicy. I can, I'm okay with that, but I'm not sure about this one or the because the people in my family, the people are different. They did it spicy, so they can do it. We normally did so spicy. I'm not sure if they with the there's something else spicy. Because last time when I put the big for them, they said it was spicy, but then they said it's acceptable. But I can escape. It's not spicy. That one is spicy. Yeah, it's not. So we have a lot of tuna. And I bring some this one so we can eat some. I don't know how to explain. I even know the name of it. I can make it. That's what I do. Can you make yes. I'm just thinking which one would be nice. You know, like an ingredient, I don't know what this is.
How big is your refrigerator? How big is your refrigerator?
We have
It's a little
no. So we have like a normal refrigerator. So we have a separately freezer. It is a little yeah. So we have a lot of things to bring. I'm thinking I can bring it. I have some ideas, but when you mention about the big, I just have some ideas. Yeah. So people will and actually we can separate from the first day earlier and yours too. Yeah, but then you're gonna be doing before the second right? 24. Yeah.
It's very vacation, so it's very early.
Yeah. So I'm 24 of the 24. Yeah.
That's good.
No, but actually in the past when I studied, I moved to Canada. So my friend, a lot of my friends, they hung out and then I moved separate. It's so funny, like here, they got the wrong calendar. I'm 23 at the time, which I did for 22. Yeah, this is fun. So how would it be here? Yeah.
So 22 cat.
No. It's 24.
Okay.
Not that one.
Okay, I think we should kick off again as I need to finish at 1:45. So it gives it half an hour, 35, 40 minutes maybe. Right, so let's have a little bit of a discussion around this. Would anyone like to sort of lead off? Just maybe telling the group what company you've chosen and any kind of insights or thoughts, ideas you've got based on any of those bullet points. So keep it fairly broad. Okay. So I think you were mentioning Spotify, right? Okay. So let's have a little discussion about Spotify then, and maybe when we're doing it, we can have a look at their site as well. Okay. Well, you can see all my kind of podcasts and stuff I like to listen to, and my jazz music and all the stuff an old guy likes. Anyway, that's Spotify. So let's then go back to our yeah. So obviously you've chosen Spotify. You'd call them, I guess, B2C? Yeah, yeah. Are there any, just out of interest, are there any kind of B2B parts of what Spotify does? Do you think it's purely B2C, or do they have any B2B relationships? Okay. right?
So it can be unique.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think there can be a B2B element, and that's always worth thinking about. When we look at the business model for a whole company, we should consider both the B2C and the B2B elements, because oftentimes there is a,
I can Google further.
yeah. Okay, good. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about what you've come up with.
First, first question, the value is in its website, brand side up, they collaborate to each other to create the best experience as a first company to access to millions on and focus on anytime anywhere to uh, personalize recommendations. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to come out of this because I don't want, I want to get to Spotify.com. So yeah, I wanted what's their main URL then, just for the company, not for the web player. Am I going to the right? Am I going to the wrong thing here? I wanted to try and build up their. Nah, it keeps doing that. There must be like a customer-facing website. Okay, don't worry. Leave it. There must be. Do you know what I mean? There must be.
I just directly Google the
Yeah.
key point.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So if I go to Google and just, I think it'll give me the same thing now. Yeah. So you've got Spotify for creators, haven't you? And Spotify for users, and so I think you're right. Spotify for artists. So there's definitely a B2B element to Spotify, isn't there, as well? That's just gonna give me the same thing. Don't worry. Okay. Right. So you were kind of talking about the value proposition of Spotify. Yeah, could you just say that again? What you think? What's the value proposition?
And just collaborate with each other to create the best experiences as a professional company. It emphasizes the personalization, the convenience, and social sharing.
Okay. Right. So I think just based on what you've said there, it's an experience, it's collaboration, it's personalization, it's sharing. So we think about all those are all themes that we've been covering in the last few weeks about services marketing, haven't we? So for example, customer relationship marketing, a lot of that's about how to personalize. And obviously they do that through the algorithm, don't they, in terms of what they recommend to you, what playlists they recommend. And then you can obviously share with friends and family as well. You can share playlists, can be useful as well. So in terms of the value in use of Spotify, it's functional, it's social, kind of emotional as well, I suppose, in terms of music, but it's about sharing, which is definitely a social job. It's about personalization, and it's about co-creation. Can you think about how co-creation takes place with Spotify, or collaboration, as they call it?
I think it's a bit like personalizing things. Just search some music that you like. And
Yeah.
It will bring some
Right.
music.
Absolutely. So that's the algorithm thing again, isn't it? That's kind of learning from what you search for and what you play, and it feeds you more of that and gives you similar artists or similar playlists to what you're listening to. So I think that's a really good example of co-creation. Then what about, you said you've done the first three. So in what ways do you think Spotify have overcome some of the hurdles associated with services?
Like in tangibility, it offers free tiers so that the user of Spotify can experience the service before committing the payments.
Okay. Yeah, so pricing tiers, isn't it? Wonder if we can get that on here. Spotify price tiers. Let's go for that. Yeah, so you get all this stuff here. There you go. You get the AI summary. Yeah, so you got the basic individual, the premium duo, premium family, etc., student, right? So you guys get a discounted rate.
Actually, I'm not a user of Spotify, but we got similar websites in China.
Okay.
It's the same.
It's same, yeah. And so would you say that there's not much to differentiate the provider in China than the Spotify? They're pretty much identical, would you say? Or do you think there's any differences or?
I think same.
Yeah.
Similar.
Similar, yeah. Okay. And would the one in China be cheaper or same price?
Well, it depends on what application you use.
Okay, I see. Right. Yeah. Okay. So so they overcome tangibility by having a very kind of various price offers, right? Any other hurdles of services marketing you think they overcome?
Variability, they just ensure that consistent personalization, human, just user can create something they like.
Yeah.
Like a human touch.
Yeah. I think it's back to your collaboration thing again, isn't it? So you're almost kind of like putting the resources in the hands of the customer, aren't you? And letting the customer, let's say, turn that resource into something that is personal to them, right? Because you think about maybe the operand and operand, like in some ways, the operand resource is kind of like the Spotify platform and the technology of Spotify. And you, as the user, are kind of using your operand resource, which is your knowledge of music, your music preferences, your sharing with other people, and you're creating a kind of a playlist or a good experience on the platform because of that. So I think that's in a way that's a kind of a way of thinking about how to reduce the variability, right? Because it might be varied, but it's personal to you. So that's all that matters, right? Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, so we had someone on the back row. I didn't remember the company. Can you just tell me? Is it a UK company or is it international or?
So it's too good to go.
Too good to go. Okay, I'm going to put that in. Too good, like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. So Too Good To Go is a service with a mobile app that connects customers to restaurants and stores that have surplus unsold food. The service covers blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's go to their website. Okay, so tell us a little bit about Too Good To Go and maybe connect it, if you can, to any of these questions here. Let's go back to the website. Yeah.
So you may have to repeat the first three questions?
Yeah, just like your ideas, right? So basically the questions we're asking these different things. So you've chosen a company, right? Would you call it B2B or B2C?
B2C.
B2C.
Yeah.
But presumably for this company to work, it has to have B2B relationships, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you were to map out the ecosystem for Too Good To Go, you'd probably find, like, for example, in the middle, you'd have Too Good To Go, do that. And then you'd have all of these other players in the ecosystem that you've got a relationship with, right? And they also might have relationships with each other. So this whole kind of ecosystem is how you, according to service dominant logic, is how you co-create value within that ecosystem. And of course, you could argue the most important the most important player is the customer. But the service can only be provided to the customer by linking up value with these other players. So I would always encourage you when you look at a company or a not-for-profit or whatever it is, you think about the ecosystem that where value is co-created with other B2B and B2C. Okay. All right. So yeah, that gives you. So they call themselves a social impact company that dreams of a planet with no food waste. Right. I like that. Are they, from your research, would you call them a not-for-profit company, or are they also profit-driven as well?
I think they still look for profit as well, but their value proposition is also to reduce the food waste.
Okay.
And provide the customer with some low price food.
Yep. Okay. But they also need to make some revenue and make a profit themselves as well. Okay, great. So let's take then. So how would you? I don't know. How would you describe or state the value proposition for Too Good to Go?
Yeah, like what I just said, I think their value proposition is to reduce the food waste.
Okay.
Yeah, and just provide the food, like I just said.
Yeah. So I think the thing I would say here is, looking at this, would you almost say there's more than one value proposition, or do you think there's only one? That's open for everybody. Obviously, you've done the research, but anybody else can jump in and say stuff if you want. But do you think they only have one value proposition, or do you think they have perhaps more than one?
Well, so I think the reduced food waste is for like the company has to define their proposition, like
Yeah.
because they want to advocate the like provide the
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the position is to protect the earth, like
Yeah.
by reducing the food waste. So that's what they claim. But I think for the like
Yeah.
in reality, they also provide the food. So
Sure.
I don't know how to say it.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think their main service proposition is about kind of social enterprise, reducing food waste, all of that, sustainability. But obviously within that, they're going to have specific features that appeal to different types of user. So for example, here they've got business solutions. I was just looking there at their surprise bags, the Too Good to Go platform, data labeling, and parcels. So they've got these almost four unique elements of the service they provide to these businesses. So I think what would be interesting to look at, if I was kind of like, say for example, Too Good to Go invited us in as kind of services marketing experts and said, right, I want you to have a look at our company, I want you to have a look at our organization, and I want you to come up with a 2-page report kind of looking at the challenges and the opportunities. What are we doing well? What could we do better? Like, from your knowledge of services marketing, how would you improve what we do and who we do it with, right? And I think that would be, really interesting challenge, because you could start then to look at who are the different customers. So again, if we go over what I've written on the whiteboard there, you could start to map out who their users are, right? Other businesses. And then you could start to look at, for example, the end-to-end surplus food management solution, right? What does this do? This enables retailers to unlock value from the excess inventory with modular software that tracks and redistributes surplus food. Okay, and then it goes into a little bit more detail. Okay, so expiry date, because obviously if we're talking about milk or cheese or dairy products, they're perishable, right? So you have to obviously not keep them more than a couple of days. They've got AI powered discounting. I'm not, we can look into what that means. Consumer marketplace. So this is basically, it looks like a platform that they're providing for other businesses, other users. Okay, so we could start to look at, what are the benefits to these users? How do they use the platform? Value and use. Maybe how do they co-create with these other actors in the ecosystem, right? So when we talk about the ecosystem over here, Vargo and Lush talk about actors, and they call it an actor-to-actor ecosystem, and each one of these is an actor. Okay, so it could be a food producer, could be the customer, could be a supplier, could be any of the. If we go through the website, we can identify all of the actors, and then we can start to think about how do they interact with each other. So what does this actor to actor ecosystem look like? Where is value created? Where is value co-created? What is that value? We can also look at things like value in use. Obviously, it's generally written like that. Value in use. Okay, so how do these different actors use the management, solution? How do they use the surprise bags, the platform, the labeling, the parcels? How are you using that service? Okay. So what you see here, actually, in each box is kind of like a little value proposition statement, isn't it? So the too good to go parcels, these help manufacturers and wholesalers to make the most of perfectly good food that won't reach retail, right? So this is food that's made that, won't go onto the shops. And then it talks about who the customer is, manufacturing, wholesale. FMCG is fast moving consumer goods, wholesale retail, grocery retail, etc., catering. So you've got the different consumer groups or user groups underneath, right? Okay, it's quite an interesting example. Did you look at any of the other ones or just the top three? Is there anything else? Like, I don't know, Blueprint, Backstage, digital marketing.
Maybe backstage.
Yeah.
About their backstage activities, I think they like so they have to the first part they have to continuously recruit their restaurants, bakeries, and some other supermarkets to join the platform so they can provide the food as they want.
Right.
And the second part is so they have to update the number of their available supplies bags depending on how much food they have each day. And the third one is to manage their digital platform.
Right.
So they can operate the app infrastructure, including their payment processing.
Yeah.
And also manage their orders and some location-based recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last part I searched is the customer support and dispute handling, so they can manage some refunds or complaints and some other technical issues.
Oh, great. Brilliant. So, yeah, do you know what you could do then, which I think would be really interesting kind of exercise? Yeah, it's better. We did this, we talked about this last week, didn't we? So, like, if you were looking at, say, too good to go, so too good to go, right? So that's your case, and you just basically, like we looked at last week, right? So basically, this is front stage up here, and this is backstage, right? Like what you were saying, okay? So front stage, backstage. Okay. And if you then were to map the journey of one of those user groups, one of those customers, whether it's a wholesaler, a retailer, all the ones they mentioned, you pick one, you wouldn't pick all of them, and then you would look at basically, you'd then, I won't go across the whole board, but you basically create lanes for the customer journey, okay, or the blueprint. And you would look at what their key kind of touch points are. So it might be, I don't know, maybe they go to your website, right? That's their first touch point. So it's kind of like here, that's their first touch point. They go to the website. And then what we need to have here, backstage, is make sure that, for example, maybe even before they go to the website, maybe they do a Google search, right? And that then takes them to the website. Okay, so what needs to be happening backstage is we need to make sure that to appear in the Google search, we need to be on that AI summary at the top of the Google results, right? So somebody has to have the technical knowledge to make sure that the website appears when they put the search in. So that might be the digital team, right? I'm just going to put digital team, right? And skills. Okay, that's basically that's the operant resource, the skills, the knowledge. And then they go to the website, right? What does the journey on the website look like? Well, you saw the website a moment ago. Where do they click? Where do they travel on the website? Do they download anything? Do they give their email address? All of that. That's almost like a journey in itself, right? So that could almost be more like multiple touch points just on the website. But then after the website, they might want to contact you or make a meeting or something like that, okay? So there would be then another maybe kind of more physical touch point, right? Where they actually want to meet up with you, and we'll call that physical. So the idea, and this is all digital, I'm doing this really quickly, but you see the idea that you've got all these touch points on the journey, and every single one of those touch points, things need to be happening in these backstage lanes to happen. So it could be people, it could be technology, it could be like, I don't know, I'm trying to think, it could be even like legal stuff, right? Because maybe there's like legal requirements around food and food waste and all that. And you can just see quickly how quickly you could build up a visual overview of how you deliver a service that creates value for your user. In fact, I would almost have that maybe as a lane, its own lane. I might even have a lane called value. What does value look like, right, from the user's point of view? And I would almost make a kind of some notes here about what does value in use look like, because this is the journey before they actually buy, but what happens, this is before they buy and this is after they buy. This is all before. And what happens after they buy, when they're actually using the service? And that's when you probably want to think about the value in use, right? How do they use it? What benefits do they get from it? And so on and so forth. So you could start to have something in the backstage here, below here, which is basically describing, articulating the value they get from their experience. Okay, so you could almost have, if you like, before, during, and after the sale. Okay, so how did they research? What did they do, when they were going in the buying process? And then afterwards, when they used the solution, how did they use it? So I think these sort of things are really interesting. And then what you start to do is you could start to connect this to this, because the things that are happening backstage probably involve these actors, some external, some internal, right? So you've got a connection between the ecosystem and the blueprint. And that's how it kind of joins up. And when you do upload the service dominant logic articles to Notebook LM and start to prompt and analyze them, you'll see that a couple of the articles specifically talk about the value ecosystem. So now you've had this kind of introduction. We've looked at a couple of examples. I know I've got a lot more slides to cover with you, but you can start to think a little bit about connecting what you heard in the lecture with what the authors have written in their articles. That will give you some more answers, and it will almost definitely give you more questions to ask, which we can, of course, cover in the lecture. Let's take one more example from anyone here at the front, and then I'll go back briefly, probably just for 5 minutes or so, to my slide deck. Do you guys want to jump in with anything? Thanks very much, by the way. I'm very interested in this good to go example. I think there's a lot of interesting things there you could explore. Which companies did you look at? Yeah, please. IHG, International
International Hotel Group.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Good. So hotels and resorts, I guess. Yep. So that's a really good, really good example. As we've been using some of the, some hotel examples, haven't we, in the course? So this is definitely a service-based, thing, intangible. So yeah, tell me a little bit about IHG.
So IHG is a B2C and B2B service company, and they own more than 6,300 hotels across 100 plus countries.
Okay.
Their loyalty program, they own their loyalty programs called IHG One Rewards.
Yep.
They own 113 plus million members right now, I assume.
Yep. So that's their loyalty program here. Be a membership program, and here's the benefits: earn points, redeem points, so on. Yep.
And their value propositions is trust, globally consistent hospitality, tailored to every traveler's needs.
Okay. Great. So I think we can link here, can't we? We can link CRM to this kind of idea of value and service dominant logic, because I'm assuming that by being a member of IHG One Rewards, they're obviously building up a profile of me as a member. Would that be, so basically if you stay multiple times, they get to know more about your behavior and your profile, and then they can personalize the service, right, which helps to reduce. Yeah. Marketing communication, but also when you experience the service, they know more about the value you want from that service, and they can then start to personalize, as you say, their communications to you. Absolutely. What other questions did we have? Any other ones there that?
Hurdles of service.
Yeah.
So because it's a service marketing, so there has intangibility.
Yeah.
So that means guests cannot experience a hotel room before the booking.
Yep.
So IHG done a virtual tours to overcome these challenges.
Okay.
And there has a guarantee for the brand tier, like luxury promise.
Yeah. Okay. So they're creating all of this content here on the website to reduce the kind of intangibility a little bit. Yeah. What about perishability? Because obviously in a hotel, that's a big challenge.
Yeah. So unsold rooms represent permanently lost.
Yep.
So they has discount for the on the same day.
Yep.
And there has IHG reward point promotions.
Yep.
Syntax of big demands.
Right. So yeah, you've mentioned a number of the P's from the marketing mix there. So you mentioned promotion, right? So they'll do special promotion when they know that some of their resorts are empty. or not, empty rooms. They'll also be using price. You mentioned pricing, discounts, right? Special price offers to try and fill otherwise empty rooms. And I would also argue that they would use different channels, which is P, right? So we've got product, which is the hotel, pricing we've talked about, promotion we've talked about. Then there's this thing called place. A place is both the physical place, um, so it's the physical place, but it's also how you get the room sold to the user. Now, some users might go directly to the website and book, but what other channels do you think I, as a customer, might use to book this hotel? It wouldn't be necessarily on this website, would it?
Yeah, customer can use the OTA, like booking.com for travel.
Yeah.
OTA.
What does OTA stand for?
It's kind of like second channel for
Yeah.
the customer, so
Yeah.
they can use the channel to book
Right.
the hotels or any activities. They
Ex-
show the compare for other.
Right. So this is an OTA, isn't it? Yeah. Booking.com. Right. So an OTA stands for online travel agency. OTA. Right. So we've got, think about those different elements of the marketing mix: product or service, more like it, or experience. Because I guess you would say to me that if I'm buying this, which I have to say looks pretty nice, I'm buying an experience, aren't I? I'm not buying a product. But then again, for service done the logic, Vargo and Lush would say that everything's a service, not just this. But anyway, so we're selling an emotional experience, aren't we? We're not just selling functional. When I see this picture, I picture myself there. It's like an experience. Okay, so we're selling experience. We're selling something that appeals to all of the senses, as we can see here. And then, of course, this is their various brands that they have: the premium, essentials, suites, and alliances. So these are obviously partnerships they have with other providers. So I think what you see here is a really rich mix of everything to do with services marketing. So I would encourage you just to, as you learn more about the theories, maybe you could keep this idea in your mind of IHG. Maybe as you learn more theory and examples and slides and lectures, you can apply it to the company or to Spotify or Good to Go or whatever the other guys have chosen in the room, because I think it's quite useful to have some example in the back of your head, and time by time you go back and think about that. And also when you come to write your exam answer, whenever the exam is after Easter, you'll be able to maybe write some examples down in your essay as you write, because they'll be in your mind already. And sometimes being able to give an example and an answer is a great way to support your understanding of the topic.
Can I ask one question?
Please, yeah.
When I was searching about this in a contract hotel, they said what I mentioned for is B2C and B2B service industry. But what I'm confused with that still hotels service is consumed by individual.
Yep.
But like in general, when you think about B2B, B means like company or
Yep.
some firm. But when the businessmen come to the hotel, but still it's individual consumer.
Right.
But how could what is says to B2B?
Why is it B2B? I think there's two ways you can think about B2B, right? You can think about it. You can think about it like this. So you can think about it as B to B to C. That's often written like that. So we're not just B2B and we're not just B2C, we're B to B to C. In other words, we need those business to business relationships to be able to deliver value to the customer. And that's a little bit like what's happening with the ecosystem there. It's business to business relationships that enable me to offer a service to the customer. So for the business traveler or the leisure traveler, for them to enjoy the experience, whether it's business trip or leisure trip or maybe a mixture, we need to have a series of business relationships to be able to offer that service to the customer, right? So it's B to B to C. But the other way that you might argue that they're also just B to B is sometimes corporations, like big companies, maybe like Microsoft or any other big company, right? Big accountancy firm. They may have a contract with IHG where all of their business travelers get a special rate at the hotels. So that's kind of more like, even though the individual business traveler, when she checks in, you can call her as like a consumer, but the company she works for has a B2B relationship with IHG. Does that make a bit of sense? So I think you can look at it either like that, or you can look at it more about the kind of relationships that then enable you to provide the service to the customer, B to B to C. There are many organizations have these business to business relationships that enable it to offer the value to the end consumer. So I think hopefully that may take a little while to think about it, but yeah. But listen, great examples. I don't think there's any point me starting back onto the slide deck again. We're nearly out of time anyway. But I hope that's kind of been a nice sort of illustration of beginning to sort of, like, let's say, break the ice of service dominant logic. There's more to cover, as you can tell. Lots of my examples are still to be covered in the slide deck. Of course, you can read ahead in my slide deck and look at the slides. You should also upload the articles. Like I said, I think it's a really good idea. And start to build up your own knowledge, develop your own examples as you've been doing. And I think that'll set a really good groundwork for that. So I know Karen and I are sharing the module, but when I'm up next, I'll let her know about this. I'll finish off on SDL elements as well. So yeah, great. Well, thanks for your co-creation efforts and for everybody. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day. I'll see you at the next session whenever I am. I don't think I'm next week. I think it's Karen, isn't it? So I'll probably going to be after Easter. Seems like a long way off, but anyway, yeah. Okay? Yeah. Thanks.